Today's chat is about the roles of identity and institutional responsibility in the mission to foster helpful civic AI agents for all. The Massachusetts community recently put out an RFC, Public Infrastructure for Private Agents, but there are also agents for all movements happening and growing all around the world. So these movements broadly, they're about, hey, how do we provide citizens with powerful personal assistance that can help us in civic tasks like accessing state benefits and making sure that we're safe when we go around neighborhoods and visit, good events that are happening around, things like setting up local businesses. So across the board through this, we're really exploring what's going on with these agent for all movements, and how do we make sure that each citizen personally has trust and control in what's going on. So today I'm stoked to be here with Kara Bombell. Kara is a strategic operations exec. She's built out a career in transforming business operations in digital and creative agencies. And in particular, she's really been able to take a role leading organizations to simultaneously prize high performance while adopting new tech and maintaining ethical and inclusive behaviors. So she's leading EthicAI right now, which she founded to help companies adapt AI technologies and still stay grounded in human dignity. So cool. Kara, I'm super excited to pick your brain on the kind of practical ethical dimensions in designing civic
super excited to be here.
Well, let's start it off, as we think about infrastructure for citizen agents, identity is at the core of that. That leads into questions like consent, delegation, revocation. But just taking that broadly, what digital identity governance questions come to your mind for civic agents?
This is a question that we've really been thinking about a lot about in Australia. And we had a social media ban that was implemented here in Australia. So there's been a lot of conversations inside this space. And the frame that I would always start with questions that would be raised is, do government services actually need claim verification, not necessarily identity verification? So is it like, are you over 16? Tick. Are you a licensed architect? Tick. Or, are you a resident? And it's rather than having that detailed infrastructure that is giving you a kind of feeling of surveillance that can often happen inside those situations. We've been exploring zero knowledge verification a lot as part of those conversations. So ultimately that's letting you, review your claim and prove a claim cryptographically rather than revealing the underlying identity as part of that. And so the government is getting a claim that, getting proof that the claim is true. So if we were able to go down that model inside Australia, it really does change those governance questions quite considerably. And so the questions that come from that are claims about like what a service needs actually before acting, and who has the authority to issue those claims, and how are they revoked when circumstances change. Or, I think most governments haven't really started, and this is true for Australia, don't know how much it's the same pattern elsewhere, but Australia has quite a sophisticated digital infrastructure, but a lot of places haven't actually started mapping how those services work. There's lots of manual processes built into the architecture. And so I think that's actually one of the first things that really needs to happen before agents are interacting at scale.
Yeah. So when you name the kind of zero knowledge aspect to demonstrating identity, I figure that there must be some identity provider and some kind of agreement around how identity is proven. Kind of who plays that role, and then maybe what are some of the agencies or other organizations around consuming that information in a trustless fashion?
Well, I think that if, like in the architecture that we've been looking at in Australia, there's ultimately like the improving the identity still happens with government, but how do we actually create the essentially the gap between what's being done on the verification side and the identity side? As I said, a lot of the conversations we're having at the moment are around age verification, specifically around social media. And so because that has actually been set up, it's less about like government services specifically, but how does a government service prove a claim is true online so that other services can integrate. And I think that that's where there's just a lot of, what will I say? Like in terms of the conversations happening in Australia in that space, there is a lot of support for the social media ban, like overwhelming support for the social media ban, but valid concerns around privacy, because a lot of the age verification and systems that are being put in place at the moment are third-party companies that have, or that reside in Estonia or reside in Singapore, and the data, like our licenses or passports or any proof of identification, is actually going to external parties. And because Australia doesn't have this big architecture, security architecture to it, it means that we are parting with a lot of really kind of confidential information that we don't necessarily want to hand over. So I don't know if that answers the original question, but I think the thing is that how we actually integrate with existing government services to create something that is an acknowledgement of where people have originated from, but then in the implementation, third parties, so that people can actually access, there is a zero knowledge framework coming from that end.
So I know you've spent so much of your career actually leading these transformations of organizations and saying, here's our strategic vision, but we need to get, people, organizations, processes, internally and externally across many different boundaries to, in fact, make this change into the new way of working. And so when you talk about the digital identity goals that you have for Australia, could you maybe name what are maybe operational steps to make that transform?
Well, I think particularly from my perspective, I have transitioned from corporate implementation in organizations, and now have really was working with government as part of consulting, but now really moving into specific not-for-profits, charities, and integrity oversight kind of functions inside government. So the nature of what those operational steps are is, they can be very different for different types of organisations. And I think the thing from my end, one of the real, I would say, considerations for us to sort of ponder on is and this is maybe also how from an ethical stance and responsibility stance, these things have to go out. It's real consideration regarding what is ethical, not just necessarily what is legal. And so, when we're looking at new frontier regulation, what we have as part of our existing architecture hasn't caught up. There's all these opportunities for gaps to be surfacing, and so what we actually need organisationally is a point of rigour, and also a absolute centering of critical thinking as part of that, because we are working in far more organic and moving, and we're in the midst of momentum as we're going through. And I think that in a lot of instances, governments or organisations kind of see it as a tick box kind of process. Okay, as if you're implementing an ERP, or you're implementing a new system, and they see it as a tool. And ultimately, we are living through this massive change. When I look to the Australian market, around only 11% of Australians believe that the benefit of AI outweighs the risk. So we've got a real trust kind of dimension that needs to be reckoned. So when we're talking about what are the steps that really need to be happening, it's the culture change, it's the applying an opportunity there to sorry, I'm getting feedback on my own voice. I don't know where it's coming through, but there's my own voice is coming through somewhere. So I suppose where I'm just getting to there is that we have this issue with political will, with how do we actually change the culture around this. And when I look at what was proposed in the RFC there is that idea of, public infrastructure, and so it's rails and not necessarily the train. And so what we actually need to do is have the people that are integrating with those systems be competent about what the risks are, what the rewards are, and really be able to communicate those steps clearly. There's a massive culture change that we need to consider as part of rolling out these types of systems.
Yeah, man, that's touching on one of the things that I really loved seeing, and maybe I saw this on like your LinkedIn or on your company's website, but that you were putting out this warning, hey, so many organizations are making AI decisions right now at breakneck speeds that are going to be really hard to reverse, and they're lacking clear frameworks for like what responsible means in practice. This is, for our listeners, me totally copying Kara's words. But so I think you just started to talk on that, but kind of how would you apply some of those warnings to these movements around public agents for all?
Yeah, well, I think that the sort of question here is really how do you make sure that you put in the structures where you're not just following what a regulator says, it's how you actually personally integrating and supporting and have a line in the sand around what your ethical stance is inside these systems. And so when a lot of organisations are looking to a regulator and be like, well, this is legal, not necessarily that this is the right thing for us to do. What we do a lot of at EthicAI is actually support boards, C-suite, with creating frameworks around defensible decisions, around not only what are the legal requirements, because yeah, sure, we can talk about the legal requirements, but ultimately the decisions that are being made today reflect on organisations and their leaders for time to come. We have come from this, the issue that we really have at the moment is that we don't know what's coming. The technology is changing quite frequently. And so the decisions that are getting made today are the ones that a lot of leaders are going to have to live with as part of their reputation ongoing. And we're seeing this in real time when you see the booing of CEOs at college graduation speeches, or you get comedians basically saying that the purpose of the next generation is to destroy AI. There is so much visceral anger and misunderstanding at a really kind of fundamental level. But I understand it because it's not just the technology, it's how the technology is landing inside a culture. And so having ethical frameworks that can support you through that transition, understanding what you're wanting to achieve, having really clear goals and objectives as part of that, means that you're less likely to be taking on technologies purely for the sake of it and like moving or reacting to the things in the short term, because ultimately those things will change, and we're living in a new era where that rate of change is always going to happen. So having a clear articulation of what you want to align to is far more important than making sure you're following a regulator's handbook.
Yeah. So in Massachusetts, we have working groups coming together around this new request for comments, all around, hey, what is the role of government in creating guardrails? But whether it's for us, whether it's for, a minister in government responsible for AI, or a mayor of a city, whoever it's for, when you've been naming, okay, let's have this ethical framework that it sounds like a playbook to me.
Yeah.
Is there a kind of a story you could lay in for some of those people who are kind of scratching their heads, being like, that sounds good, but what does that look like on the ground? What's someone who's done that?
Really good example, actually, one that we've done recently with an integrity oversight ombudsman. So they are looking after child safety. So when you're looking at implementing child safety opportunities, there's a few things that you really need to consider. Not only, obviously, the safety of and the prioritization, the triage of cases in those instances of the beneficiaries of the government service, but you also need to consider the impact on the workforce given vicarious trauma what they're exposed to as part of that process, how the level of the quality of service can be impacted by the humans on the ground. And so when we were having these conversations regarding these ethical guardrails in this instance, it was really interesting because the initial reaction is, oh, well, we don't want to have any sort of integration. And just to be clear, we're not talking about integration with large language models. We're talking about, small language models, locally run and compounded. So it's not like any sort of data's going out, or where the inference is happening is local. But what that means is, what we sort of stepped through is, okay, in the instance that the worst thing was to happen, like go through these scenarios with the team. What was the decision that we made to get there? And have we done everything in our power to ensure that we are preserving privacy, that we are acting on behalf of the beneficiary in a way that we would stand by as part of any sort of system that we're implementing? And so, and also, how are we advocating for staff mental health as part of that as well? Because when you're consistently barraged with that type of content, it is quite difficult to manage. And so I think that the knee-jerk reaction is often in those instances, oh, well, we don't want to have AI as part of that process. But then what we really do as the comparison is, well, what is being lost by having it being only run, like not being augmented inside an AI workflow? And, what could be the failure points of having that? And so typically what you see in that type of scenario is a lack of more trend analysis across all the cases. Whether or not we're seeing patterns inside the data is something that's really kind of front and center as part of those conversations. So understanding and really kind of evaluating what your objectives are, where you're trying to go, what your measures of success are. But then in the instances, like what are the second and third order consequences of when you're making these decisions? Are you able to stand by those decisions with time and doing some, and this sounds a bit but doing some role play around what that would look like in worst case scenarios? Have you really gone and kind of contemplated what those would be, and whether or not you would still stand by your decision? So in the instance, for example, in a child safety implementation, if, for example, we're looking at a triage issue where someone was deprioritized on a list, what is the impact? It's like, well, could that possibly happen when a human is the person who's triaging? Of course, that happens all the time. So it's like, okay, where are we trading off something? What have we got to gain? And then, as I said, there's high scrutiny on automated decision-making processes. So we have to kind of consider that cultural context at the same time, but really think about, what there is to gain, but then ensuring that you've really kind of thought through what that could look like in terms of responsible and ethical implementation.
Nice. Yeah. I'm just really appreciating in that the practicality of sitting down, really running the exercise on what trade-offs we have to face. We have to make some choice either way, because it's so easy to say we don't trust AI. Don't do it.
Exactly.
And whether it's AI, whether it's other automation, other country. There's trade-off points everywhere, right?
But I think that's what this AI revolution is really doing. It's putting to the front a different skill set that's really needed to take flight in a AI augmented world. And that is the time that is saved on the administrative layer actually has to move towards a critical thinking layer. And it's all about, and I will cite MIT research inside this space, the EPOCH research, which I absolutely love and has been so formative in my sort of thinking around how to implement these systems, is that we really need to look at how we are preserving empathy, presence, opinion, critical thinking, creativity, hope and vision. Those are the skills that we're going to have to create an uplift for people inside the workforce to retain what is uniquely human that AI or automated systems cannot do. And so when a lot of people are thinking about, role change, or those are the types of skills that I feel like a lot of people have to lean into as part of shaping their role, because it's going to be something that's really, there is a real open opportunity here to make the world better. I don't think anyone thinks that the world in its current state is perfect. Like I very much doubt that anyone has that feeling. And so when people are like, where there's a displacement of jobs, or we're moving in different directions, it's like, yeah, but I don't know if necessarily that's always a bad thing, because I don't think anyone when they were a child woke up and were like, you know what I want to do? I want to be in an Excel spreadsheet all day. That's what I want to do. Like, there is an opportunity here to tap into new skills that mean we are more connected to each other. That is, however, a design choice. And we need to be prioritizing and having these more active conversations in the space, so that we understand that that is what we're designing for, rather than being dictated to by either the sort of big tech paradigm, or being brought into the media fear sort of narrative as well.
Yeah, there's no shortage of things to complain about and legitimately be concerned about in the world. And it would be so marvelous if one of the various impacts that AI really brings onto our ways of organizing as communities is to be more human with each other. To be more in touch with these sides that so often have been really sidelined by fitting into rigid roles inside organizations where you have to kind of rotely repeat the same thing.
Exactly. And I think that that's deeply unhuman. Like, that's what I actually think is so interesting, is that, and I get change is really hard. And I get that there is a bit of a leap of faith, which is why we need to have more, voices inside the space that aren't just agitating towards large language model implementation. It's like, where can AI be truly helpful for people? And so having something like, what we're talking about here, which is digital agents inside government that are advocating on behalf of people, so that people have access and equity inside implementation, that there is opportunities there for a much better society if we do it right. And as I said, the thing that we're really battling against at the moment is whether or not we feel trust with the people who are making those decisions. And I think that, and I can only speak as an outsider to the American system, but being an outsider to what's happening, it looks very interesting, to say the least. And in terms of how people are feeling about their trust inside government, and I've said this before in other podcasts. Like, it's one of those things that we're in Australia. I've had these conversations with Americans, and like, why do you care so much about American policy or American politics? And we don't really have a choice. Like, we get all the structures that you guys are putting in place ripples down into our economies. And so even just seeing recently what happened with Fable being pulled offline, that has had a massive impact and complication to sovereignty inside the Australian system. And like, I'm saying Australian, but obviously this is now a global ripple effect, because that's really precedent setting in terms of who has access to these systems, and what does that mean when governments are placing dependencies inside foreign-based tech. So really sort of interesting and enlightening kind of time. But as I said, the main drive here is, how do we get more people who care really deeply to understand enough about the technology and the potential of the technology, rather than because I still have so many conversations with members of parliament or with leaders in organisations, and they are just blindsided. They don't know what this technology is, and they are being brought into the media narrative around okay, well, everyone's losing their jobs and this is all automated. And that's what their constituents are dealing with as well, and what they're concerned by. So things that we just need to consider as part of that. And I think that education, AI literacy, and really driving that sense of aligning on the goals and of what needs to be achieved is something that we really need to focus on, because we can say, and this is part of that 2 questions ago when you were saying, what do you need to do operationally inside an organization, is exactly what you need to do in society. How do you bring people along for the journey? How do they understand the benefits, the goals that you're trying to achieve, and then ensure that they feel trust in the system that's being embedded?
Yeah. Well, one of the reminders that just here in Massachusetts in the United States, we keep giving ourselves is, with the social networking wave, government waited, and there were costs for that, and we have for-profit control over these domains. And it is really wonderful watching from this side of the world what Australia is now doing and really leading the way. And we've now seen the UK has followed, and I bet I'm forgetting people also.
There's Spain, there's many countries that have been talking about implementing it, and it's like such a point of pride. And I think that Australia should really take more, the evidence is there, and whether or not you want to contend with the data around Jonathan Haidt's anxious generation, cool, like there's all these kind of conversation, correlation, causation, sure. We know, even at an anecdotal level, that, like on a personal level, as adults, we know that these systems are highly addictive and that they are impacting on how we integrate with the world and what we see of the world. We're seeing the artifacts of that through, the kind of, radicalization of young men. We're seeing it with the impacts on self-image with young women. And we know that those things are happening. And so it's like, okay, well, we've got to wait for this type of like deep peer research, what the actual impacts are before we make it. No, like we don't have to wait that long. We can see it happening in real time. And the whole purpose of regulation is to support people being able to make better decisions with how they're using these technologies, or purely to understand. We've seen from the meta trials, that there has been a real purposeful desire to obfuscate some of the data that was coming through as part of internal research. So I do agree that like this is why, when we're implementing AI, there is a urgency around making sure that we're engaging with the same things that we should have learned from social media before it got rolled out and was, very much hook, line and sinker on the corporate benefits element, but now understanding that impact. Having something like AI systems that now are embedded inside decisions for government, and obviously the impact there is so much more pronounced for how people are living inside their day-to-day. And so, questions around equity and accessibility and bias, these all have to be so readily addressed as part of that implementation. Let's take those lessons. And as I said, that like with Australia, we are often seen as a bit of a guinea pig because we've got a small population. We're quite an egalitarian population. And so there is a far more openness to these types of regulations. Obviously in America there's a very different kind of libertarian kind of slant. Australia is a bit different culturally. So we can kind of test these things, see what the results are. And I find it really interesting inside that sort of space is that, people are like, well, we haven't seen results in 3 months. We get a lot of these kind of conversations happening. Well, some 16-year-olds still have access to social media. And it's like, I don't really think that's the point. I think what we have to look at is what is happening over time, because who's not getting access now is the 8-year-olds, the younger kids who aren't being entered into the funnel. That's what we have to start really looking at and researching. So again, swinging back to digital agents is like, what does success look like? Really clearly articulating the benefits of doing something like this, I can say that we've learnt from the social media ban a few things around that communication aspect, because there is a lot of benefit and power in big tech. Like what big tech is really doing is muddying the waters a lot inside the conversations around it, and they have the power and the money and the opportunity to do so, and they will at every point. So it's something to be really cognizant of, is that even when you're implementing these systems with every well thought intention put in place, you will also have the massive lobbying arm of big tech driving a lot of the conversation inside that space as well.
Yep. And frankly, that's one of the reasons we shouldn't be waiting for integrating work with AI in responsible, thoughtful ways. But right now is the 100%. Best time to be.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to be embedded with big tech, and that's my concern. Is that then you have got this, the decision making gets happened. It becomes corporatized. It becomes completely, for capital gain, and you're going to end up with poorer systems that aren't servicing community in the ways that were intended, because it has been taken over or privatized as part of that process. And man, I really am keen to see the benefits of AI, because I can see it, I can tangibly feel it, and I know when I've worked with organizations, I can see the benefit of creating these tools and using them internally to create meaningful change. And if we sort of sit on our and like the main thing is that what I'm saying in terms of responsibility, it shouldn't slow people down. It's just actually creating the layer of cognition around why we're doing things, rather than just a rapid pace, as speed out. And ultimately, to have that just requires a layer of people asking the right questions to form the solution inside the design phase, not in the post rollout. Okay, now we're trying to now we're trying to band-aid and sticky tape everything together.
Seriously. Well, this has been great, Cara. We've got the call to action, the urgency, the hope, the possibility, all bundled together on really what's coming up with AI. So, man, any final comment from you?
I just think that what is being done at the moment in Massachusetts is something that is so interesting, and I'm so excited. And I came across the use case when Doot was being rolled out in India and inside the Global Impact Summit, and I thought it was so interesting, and I'm so excited to see it roll out. And as I said, I think Australia also has a real opportunity and a position to be part of this kind of revolution inside digital agents inside government. How we do that is for the questions right now. We need people advocating and coming out of the woodwork to start being engaged in the civil discourse around these things. A lot of people are either sort of removing themselves from the conversation, not integrating, with what's happening. But we actually need a quorum of different types of people. It's not just the tech people that need to own AI adoption. And I think that's a kind of a real sort of point that I love to always mention, is that there is so many opportunities inside this space for diverse voices, and we need to make the environment feel as welcoming for those voices as possible as well, because we can only create the society that we want if we have a more diverse range of people coming to the table, understanding, thinking about their perspectives and what they bring to that journey.
Super, super well said. Thank you so much, Cara.
Thank you.